You're listening to Becoming CEO, where we share our journeys as solo founders to becoming the CEO of seven-figure businesses.
And these are our behind-the-scenes conversations as we figure it out. And these are things that most people just aren't sharing.
All right, welcome back to another episode. This is the COVID edition. Ahmed has COVID working from home, but we're going to talk about numbers today. Everyone hopes you're feeling well, buddy.
And I hope this is audio only because I'm not really dressed for the occasion, and I found a big stain on my shirt just now, which I'm really self-conscious about. So we're not going to publish video on this one, are we?
Hopefully, well, maybe we'll see. Maybe
you're allowed to wear dirty clothes when
it.
You have COVID.
Yes. The luxuries of working from home. Cool. So what I wanted to talk about today, I kind of was in this session, kind of going through this like intensive mastermind session that I'm participating in. And one of the speakers is, he's like, has a 8-figure coaching business, actually coaching, like auto mechanics, like auto shops. And he's like really in the numbers. And so he did a whole presentation on like running your business by the numbers. So it kind of got me really thinking. It's a space that I think, or topic that I think our space doesn't cover that deeply. And I know if I had learned some of the things and just even was reminded to be focused on some of these things earlier on, I feel like I would have been in a much better place. And I know you're a numbers guy, so I thought we could jam on running your business by the numbers.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if I'm a numbers guy. And when you first brought this up, I was like, oh, I got some stuff to say here. I'm a numbers guy in terms of like, I'm really good at tracking lead indicators. And you've seen some of our stuff. Like we're really robust with lead indicators on the marketing side, on the sales side. And like, we're tracking that stuff really quickly. What I'm not good at is like the post-mortem evaluation, right? Like I'm good at the lead stuff, not the lag stuff. And it's funny because I had an experience recently, which is where this topic kind of struck a chord with me, where, actually looking at the P&L, we didn't have a great Q1. We're coming up now at the end of Q1. We didn't have a great Q1. And in my mind, I didn't really look at the P&L closely until like now, like end of Q1. In my mind, it was much worse than it actually was, right? So this notion of taking the emotion out of the equation is really powerful because I was really like beating myself up about like, oh, this has been a terrible quarter. I'm like, what's going on? And what are we going to do? And I was like letting the emotions catastrophize everything for me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas when I look at the numbers, I'm not happy with the picture. It's definitely not as bad as my emotions were leading me to believe it was.
Yeah. And so for me, and I think and this I think is what's interesting about, depending upon what numbers you're looking at, right? Like looking at both those leading and lag, like you could say, yeah, okay, cool. Q1, we didn't hit target. It wasn't as bad as my emotions were leading me to believe, but I can now see where there's an issue. But I can also see over the last, like, say, 30 to 45 days that the leading indicators are trending in the correct direction to remedy this lag indicator that I'm currently not so happy with. And so you could kind of be confident in, okay, at least we're moving in a better direction and I can be monitoring that. So I think that's good. In this presentation, and maybe this could be the topic or the title of this episode is, he said, he had some bangers. His name is Aaron Stokes, by the way. Shout out to him. I just heard of him recently. And he says, profitability is in your waist. And he said, every month, if you're the owner of the business, it is your fiduciary responsibility to the business to look at your P&L, your balance sheet, and your business summary. And he drew this little diagram of like a person and like, hey, like you think you have, like you need to make this decision and you're like, all right, maybe it's like about firing someone. And it's like, I'm 51%, it's like a 51 to 49 decision in your head. Like it's so close. And because you don't have this clarity, like there's this big fog and you go through the fog, you look at these numbers and you're like, oh, 99 to 1, I should make this move. Like the numbers tell me this person has to go, sort of thing. And he's like, oftentimes we don't look at these things frequently enough to to act. And so we delay decisions that are really right in front of us on a monthly basis. And he's like, I don't care if I'm on my vacation. I don't care if I'm sick. He's like, I literally print them out and I have a red marker and a blue marker. And I circle things in red that I'm like, I have questions about. And he's like, if you're not doing that, you are probably missing out on a ton of profit. And like that one hit me hard. And then like that fiduciary responsibility, because it's one of those things for me personally, like I've always told myself, well, I'm not a numbers person. Like I don't like these things, but it's like, if you can learn to read a balance sheet and a P&L, and even if you're not good, like I've started doing it recently, like even before I heard this. And it's like, yeah, like you pick up on things. Like I have a conversation with you, I go look at it and I'm like, oh, like I see it's starting to come together, right? Like and so it's kind of like one of those acquired by taste sort of things, I feel like. But yeah, so
I have a challenge for
super. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not, and I don't. It's not that I disagree. I think it
Yeah.
depends on the person. May I?
Yeah. Go right
So
ahead.
here's my thing, and like I agree with the sentiment. Profitability is in your waist, and I agree that their oversight over the numbers is the responsible, fiduciary responsible thing to do. Absolutely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's my issue, personally, myself. I know that if my
Mm-hmm.
brain starts thinking about cutting, it doesn't think about growing. That's like me personally. I know that if I start thinking about cutting,
he called all that out.
Yeah, and said what?
Just like, and so he comes from a place where like he goes, look, as a coaching, consulting business, online, whatever course business, he's like, our businesses are designed to be like ridiculously profitable. Like that's just like how like they're built. But like if you look at the rest of the business world, like they operate on much smaller margins and they have to pay attention to these things. And he's like, if you don't think in 5-10 years that more people are going to be competing with you in this space, you're stupid. Thus, if you don't get a hold of your numbers now, you having this waste and making these poor decisions because of the huge margins and just, oh, I can always focus on growth, blah, blah, blah. Like it will become difficult to compete and you will lose. And so he's like, it might not be that important to you now. He's like, but when all of the big boys realize what's going on, which they are, like the McKinseys and all, like they're bringing online stuff. E-learning's blowing up. Like more and more people. Hell, you're teaching half of your competition, and so am I. And so like at some point, it's gonna be the sustainability is what he talked about. He's like, it's gonna be found in this nuance. And he's like, that's where the real business owners will survive and the fake ones will fall out, right? Because all they care about is they measure success by how much money is in their checking account. He's like, but what you don't pay attention to is most of that money in your checking account is already spoken for next month. And so it's not an indication of health at all. And I'm guilty myself of that. And, you hear a lot of the entrepreneurs like flashing their bank account and it's like, cool. Like you took that screenshot on the day when, before 80% of it was going to be taken out for all of your overhead, and it looks cool. And so, yeah, obviously I think and he was very growth minded. He's like, they were pacing. Last year they were, I believe, they were 7 figures high. They were like mid 7 figures last year, and they're pacing for like double growth. So like he wasn't saying don't focus on growth. He was just saying that there's a lot of profit, and like as someone who might want to sell your business at some point, or as the owner, make it more profitable to you. It's actually in your best interest to pay attention to these things. And it's not always about, he wasn't always about like cutting, but it was like looking at it from the perspective of, oh, my COGS are too high right now. And like he talked a lot about gross margin, which I think a lot of people don't pay attention to and or confuse with net profit. And so gross profit margin being like the margin per additional client. And he's like, in coaching businesses, like pretty much all coaching businesses, that number should be like 75% at a minimum. Like it should be 75 to 80%. And if you can get a gross margin of 75 to 80%, you can actually tee up a 50% profit margin when done correctly. And I think we often spend on certain things that probably decrease that, or we don't look at the gross margin. We always look at net, or they're confused on what that is. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. He did speak to that. My interpretation was he's definitely still growth minded, but like in a non-wasteful, lean way. He's like, why do 20 million and only make, one, when if I pay attention to these numbers, I can make 20 million and come home with whatever, like a lot more, like it just,
Yeah, and
so
and I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'm saying you got to know yourself and know like the extent to which you can engage with it, because there's always going to be a trade-off, right? Like even just time,
yeah,
headspace, energy, like there is a trade-off in terms of where you spend your attention, right? And
yeah,
like for me
yeah, for sure.
personally, I've neglected that for a long time, and
Mm,
I just decided that I'm probably not going to get my act together and start focusing on it. So I've assigned it to, the second most senior person in the company after me. And she's incentivized to
yeah.
find those savings. And there's a process there, and I'm going to be involved, but I'm not relying on myself to take the initiative to do it. I built a process around it. That's been my solution.
Yeah, and he was talking about like obviously you should have a really good bookkeeper that understands your industry and industry benchmarks. Like he's like, I'm not doing
Hmm.
the bookkeeping. He's like, someone's handing me these, and I at least get my eyes on them once a month, and kind of call out specific things. And one he said one thing, I forget if it was him or someone else. There's let me see if I can find the notes. He said a lot of people talk about like strategic planning, and he's like, it's business planning and strategy. They're two separate things. And you need to like have a strategy, but then the business planning is like the numbers that support that plan. And a lot of people like talk about strategic planning like they're like the same thing, and he's like, they're not. You should make sure that they're separate, sort of thing. But he's just like, everything shows up in your numbers. It was kind of like the big takeaway. And like looking at specifically on these three documents, the P&L, which, really at its simplest, and he definitely kept it really simple, like P&L, your revenue, your costs, your profit. Balance sheet is, your accounts history. Business summary is, number of sales, number of terminations, aka churn, number of current active clients, average client order value, and like have that compared to like a benchmark inside your industry. Those are kind of some things that you should be aware about. Like, oh, like in my industry, everyone has, $3,000 higher average order value. Like, what am I doing wrong? Sort of thing. Where can we get better? Nonetheless, it was pretty eye opening, and I think put a little fire under my butt, because I know that we're not as profitable as I'd like / we would like to be. And I can tell you that from what we've talked about, Q1 has been hard. And, it's like one of those, the commentary around like, you kind of daily optimization, like recalibrating of your vision, to mitigate the lows. Well, it's like, if you've been doing this all along and you're already running like tip top profitability, it probably would help further navigate, like help you navigate some of these ruts, when they happen, versus being like, oh man, like we're way behind, and oh wow, there's a ton of waste here. Like almost always just making sure, like, hey, like simple things that, again, a bookkeeper should probably, or a controller should probably see, is like, hey, we're paying $1,000 a month for this software that we never use anymore. Like nobody's using it. No one's even logged in. No one even knows the password anymore. Like we could probably save 12 grand a year, like just there. Like that's 12 grand potentially in your pocket as the owner, so like little things like that do compound. And I know I'm very guilty, at least from a software perspective.
Yeah, growth, when you're growing, people neglect efficiency. That's just a thing, right? Because
Yeah.
I think it's a couple of things. I think one is you're busy growing and your attention's focused there, and secondly, you tend to underplay the inefficiencies because you're growing. And so there's this narrative around, well,
Mm-hmm.
we're growing. Yeah, there's gonna be, like, do I really need to spend my time worrying about $1,000 a month if we're growing to 250 whatever per month, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but to your point, like if you can make the good times better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can capitalize on the growth and improve your margins and put more cash in the bank, you'll have an easier time, withstanding the inevitable. And every business is cyclical to some extent,
Yeah.
right? Inevitably, everyone's going to
100%.
have those tighter periods. Um,
For sure.
so yeah, I'm with you on that. Like my big thing has been, I'm never going to be the guy to like
Yeah.
take the initiative to take a look at those things. So I need people around me, to your point, bookkeeper, accountant, controller. Like I need somebody to own the process, involve me when I need to be involved. And yeah, we're only learning that lesson now, and it's an important lesson.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, if anything, I think if you had to sum up the takeaway, if I had to sum up kind of this conversation, it would be one, if you're not tracking these things, I think one, it's probably, even as the owner, if it's not your skill set, I think to brush up on understanding them so that when you have the appropriate team member, bookkeeper, whatever, that's sharing this information with you, that you can see through the fog fast enough to make some decisions. And you can, in one of the conversations, that one of the things he said, I believe he said, it might have been one of the other people that chimed in, as to why, at least I think he said the fiduciary responsibility piece was like, okay, cool, I can pay a bookkeeper, I can incentivize someone to look for these things, but especially in like fast growth mode, unless you're amazing at communicating long-term vision, no one's probably going to spot, even being incentivized, they probably won't see the numbers the way you're seeing them. And so there could be things that they're going to always miss because they're just not you. It's not their business. Like they're doing what you told them to do. And there's things happening inside your head that you haven't ever clearly communicated to them that maybe you didn't even know that. And so there is a lack of communication happening, not because they're uneducated, just because they can't be you. They can't be inside your head. And so like having your eyes run through that to maybe spot those things, I guess an hour a month, maybe like within the first, few weeks, looking, reflecting back, probably would help. At least that's how I'd like to think. So that's something I'm going to start working on. I know personally, because
You made a really
again,
interesting point. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
So you made a really interesting point earlier about lead versus lag. That I never really thought of it that way, but when you made this comment about like you need to understand both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, I've historically have had a heavy bias towards lead. Like I pay, this, I pay really like close attention to lead indicators, and not nearly enough towards lag. And I think that's an important lesson. And some people are the opposite, right? Like they're too much focused on lag, not enough on lead. I think becoming CEO, playing owner, it's probably a sign of maturity is having a pretty healthy balance of lead versus lag. When lag is a challenge, you don't have a pity party as long as your lead is strong, because that lead predicts the future, right?
Right.
And the opposite is true too, right? If lag is strong, right, don't get too full of yourself if lead isn't strong as well.
Yeah, and if you think about leadership, like becoming the leader, right? Like as you wear the CEO hat more and more, you're probably not the one reporting on the lead indicators anymore. Like your team's responsible for telling you the lead, and then you have to look at the lead and say, well, hey, like it's supposed to be doing this over here, but it hasn't. Like, so it looks good from our lead indicator projections, but like what if you think about what the intention of that thing is supposed to do down the road, well, that's not happening. So like, what is it leading to? Like, because it's not leading to this number that I thought it would be leading to, is like how I'm kind of interpreting that. Like, so almost like, all right, like let me connect these dots. Are all these things that we've been focused on that look good on this spreadsheet, do they translate to what you would want to see as a result down the road was really interesting.
I feel
so
like
yeah,
that's
I
the
think
most eloquent explanation of being an owner that I've ever heard before.
I'll
Like
take
it's like
it. So we
your
should end now.
job, your job as an owner is to, one, push the lead indicators up, and two, figure out why they aren't translating into lag indicators.
Yeah, there you go.
That's where all my time goes,
Yes.
basically.
Yeah, there you go.
Well done, Greg.
Yeah, thanks. It took a little bit to get there, but 20 minutes to get there. But the moral of the story, I think everything shows up in your numbers on the lead side, on the lag side, and if you don't know how to look at them to remove emotion, probably just leads to more upward and downward swings that might not be necessary, and or making the right decision or a decision too quickly based on these things. So I think that's that's the game, because as you make mistakes, back in the day, a decision could cost you $5,000, right? As you get bigger and bigger, the cost of the wrong decision grows. So like you could make a 6-figure mistake right now, and like that probably wouldn't be something. You could probably make a 7-figure mistake right now at this stage. Like that's like at the level that you're at. So you got to pay attention to some of these things and be able to spot them. Like, oh, well, if I do this, I can start to see how this whole thing shakes out, and no bueno. So dial it in, guys. I think it's just part of the role, right? Becoming a CEO, wearing that hat.
Know your numbers. Until next time.
Take it easy, guys.